Thank you everyone for joining us today in the latest in the Insight series online. My name is Mark Catchlove. I head up the Miller Knoll Insight Group and I'm part of our research and insights team. And in case you're confused about Miller Knoll, Herman Miller and acquired Knoll, and together we formed the company Miller Knoll, but all those brands that you know and love still exist. But I want to introduce today's speaker, Marco van Gelder. Marco is the senior consultant for the EMEA region of Veldhoen and Company, and he leads workplace analytics. He's had a focus in the past on working from home, sustainability, and activity-based working. Now, this is impressive. He's got a BA in philosophy, a master's in business administration, and that's not enough. He's working on his PhD at Tilburg University in the HR studies department. But above all that, this year, Marco completed the Marathon des Sables, which for some of you that don't know, I think it takes place over 6 days, more than 250 kilometers. He's a crazy man. So well done, Marco, on doing that. Marco's looking at this question today. Hybrid working, utopia or not? Please use the questions, the chat box for questions as we go along. Marco, thank you very much for joining us. Looking forward to another great session. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for this introduction. And hello, everybody. Really love it to be here with you all. And I think we have a very fascinating question to talk about: hybrid ways of working, utopia or not. To start with, I want to go back with you in time.
Remember when Monday mornings were like this?
Sounds of Monday morning, you know, the alarm clock runs off, you need to go down to get your breakfast up and ready, so you could join traffic all the way to the office. And the same thing happened the other way around. At the evenings, you join the traffic jam on your way home. And all of a sudden, we met the pandemic, and every physical interactions were switched off. And actually, the pandemic locked us up in our homes. And I don't know if you recognized it. I'm living over here in the city. For me, I even didn't know what day of the week it was, because every day was like a Sunday morning. For many of us, this pandemic really disrupted the status quo. All of a sudden, we got that moment in time that we maybe could go back to the office. I don't know, or you were in the same situation. How are we going back to the office? How are we going to do it? How do we keep distance in the office? And all of a sudden, we start to realize that we had a very, actually, moment in time that we realized that we never can go back in time, that we did not have the experience of working from home. And all the discussions started. For sure you saw all the studies about pre-COVID and how are we going to move forward. This is an outcome of another consultancy firm. Moving forward and post-pandemic, working from home will be very, very realistic. A lot of people want to work from home when we are ready. But what happened actually also, and I think that's very fascinating to dive into, is the fact that while we were working from home, people started to experiment. Actually, we were able to step sort of behind the curtain. We could step out of this space-time cube called an office, where we were working between 9 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the evenings, where we really could explore and create other ways of habits and ways of working. So if you want to look at this more deeply, we can zoom out a little bit, and I want to discuss with you a study we did in 2021. In the collaboration with Tilburg University, but also the Technical University in Denmark, we were able to conduct a study among 6,000 knowledge workers in Western Europe. And what we wanted to understand, because actually this was the first time that on such a large scale people were actually forced to work from home, we wanted to understand what were the experience pros, so the positive sides of working from home, versus the cons, so the negative sides of working from home. One of the things, if you look to the outcome of the figures, you could see that On average, the pros, so the experience positive sides of working from home, was bigger than the experience negative sides. But if you look deeper in the data, we could find a few very fascinating things. And I just want to share them with you. The first one is one of the most important pros is no commuting. By far, people are really happy that they have less commuting when they work from home. So that means from another perspective that having this extra time is of extreme value for everybody. It also started the discussion, why should we go to the office anyway? Another very important pro is this one, having the freedom to move on your own ways from home. So it's much more relaxed to work from home, to have a little bit more freedom in your calendar, maybe also more freedom about what you wear. Because what we know and what we've seen also in other studies, when we bring our private lives to the office, the work will become less uniform. People really appreciate that. But there's also a flip side, a downside. And one of the biggest negative sides people experience while working from home is this one, Zoom fatigue. The fact that everything became screen related. So not having a walk from one meeting room to another meeting room, no, everything became screen related. I think you recognize it. And if you look at this effect of Zoom fatigue, there are two perspectives on it. The first one has to do with a sort of content overload. So maybe you recognize it. All the meetings in your calendar, if you have a slot free, people still push some things in it or they send us chat. Collaboration overload is really pushing us into an unwanted directions, and it really needs to be solved. And I think renegotiation between the way we work together is becoming very important. We really need to start a discussion from how can we move from FOMO to JOMO, or from the fear of missing out to the joy of missing out. That's really going to be important in the future. And another aspect is what we call context deprivation. So the fact that the communication is only on this small scale, all the small screens I don't see in front of me even, most of the communication is done by body language. And it means that if we don't see the body language, your brain really needs to work much harder to compensate. So it's very complex for us as humans to only work on this way. But lastly but not least, if you talk about the potential of a person, of us, of human beings, what is really important if you want to get a grip on this potential? It has to do with the interactions. That's really what makes us human. Interaction with other people. Interaction within your team really builds up to engagement, to trust and cooperation, and brings us forward productivity. And if you want to go further and go to your wider social networks, where you can explore things outside of your team, really adds up also in this part of productivity, creativity, and innovation. But during the pandemic, I think you recognize it. We really needed to take care of our own mental health during the social distancing. We really needed to make decisions. Where are we going to spend our time? And that's what we can see in data. We can see in data, if you look at the social networks and how social networks have developed over time, that the closed social networks, that's the green line you see on top. So the networks of your own teams, they become very strong. And why did they become strong? Because we spend even more time, organized time in our own teams, but at the price of the distance network. And that's the dark line you see on your screen, is the lower line. We had less time to invest in our wider social networks. And for a long-term perspective, this is possibly a risk for a productivity perspective because of hidden costs, but also because of creativity and innovation. Creativity and innovation really thrive also on those wide distance networks. And social interaction, that is by far what we miss most. That's what makes us human. That's what adds value to us, but also to our work. That means moving forward, we really need to find this new balance. We need to find this new balance in questions like, with who do we going to collaborate? How are we going to organize it? Where are we going to collaborate? And what exactly is it what we are going to do? And then we come to a point, maybe for a lot of us, common ground, creating great places to work, places people really love to go to. And then we create those beautiful coffee bars, etc., really to find and to create a place people want to go to. I put it very simple, and it's not 100% complete, but for those not in the business, how we work very much oversimplified. We have this data of occupancy studies, of space availability, of budget, maybe also of other information we have, of activities people do. And based on all this data, we create something, we make a beautiful design, which we hand over to the users. We really would like to sell it, I call it sell it to the users. We really want to be attractive for them to use this space as much as possible. What we see happen, and we see that in many engagements where we created those beautiful buildings, but where we have to deal with the fact, where are the users? That's what we see in reality. Where are the people? They were supposed to come to the office, but where are they? So the question actually is, what's going on? And back then we started to engage with a lot of our clients who were having this discussion. And there were a few things we really observed. The first and most important thing is that out of scope are all the different interests. So we know from research, but also from practice while having this discussion with all these clients, we found out that all the individual interests, all the individual preferences are actually out of scope in designing new offices. And also although we looked at all the different dynamics within teams, I think you recognize it. If you look to a finance team, to an HR team, or to some business teams, there's a totally different collaboration dynamic in it. But how does it actually interfere, and the amount of it is not very often taken into account in scope. And the other side, leadership, when we talk about leadership, what do they want moving forward? They put attention towards spontaneous encounterments. Why? Spontaneous encounterments make sure that people spontaneously have the possibility to interact with each other at the water cooler, which is important also to maintain culture, which is important for innovation. And managers, they still want to have in-person meetings. I don't know what your experience is. You can do a lot really virtual online. Works perfect for a lot of the activities. But an in-person meeting has a very important position and is a very much of value. So managers really want to make sure that in their teams, but also cross teams, that there are in-person meetings. So put it very technically, and sorry for this, if you talk from a technical perspective, what we actually want to do, what we try to solve is a sort of equation. An equation where we look at personal preferences in the context of team agreements and physical constraints. We want to find something, a moment in space and time. Before I move on, I want to pause for 1 second just to check, does it make sense, this equation? Are there questions about, does everybody understand it? Mark, maybe you can see, or there are comments about it. Bertie, sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, I think everyone else is just entranced.
Good. Moving forward, regarding this equation, how many options are there? Just have a think about it. Just think about it. If you look to your own team or to a client, take a client in your mind. You have those teams, maybe 20, 40 people. They all have their personal preferences. Some take care of the children or have other preferences of working from home, working from the office. Can be anything, right? Sometimes you just have your in-team collaboration. Sometimes you cross-team collaboration. Maybe you work in an agile team with different interactions. You have some physical limitations. You want to have the spontaneous encounters. I think you already get a sort of sense that maybe it's 100 or 200 or whatever. The answer is almost infinite. There are so many options to make. And this is also our experience when we engage with clients, when we talk with them moving forward in hybrid ways of working, where we discuss with them the options of what will be the policy structure be, how are we going to organize it. When we wanted to make it practical, we found out that there are so many options that working hybrid actually is here to fail. And why? Actually due to one reason, and actually our own limitations. And I will show you why. Because what's actually the question we want to solve? Zooming in, looking at it from a totally different perspective, but this is actually the same story. If you walk around in your office, what is happening over there? We see on the left side, colleagues. Yeah, actually, this is for everybody, true for everybody. We have a personal preference, working from home, working from the office. This can be something like taking care of your children. I mentioned this example already, but also the other way around. Some people don't want to work from home. They want to work from the office. And there can be a very good reason. It can be the reason that they don't have a good space to work in, or they miss the social interactions. It can be anything. It can be the case that you want to take care of other people, or that you are a part-timer. So there are many variables. They also can change over time, where based upon you can have a preference for working from home versus working from the office. Secondly, you want to have the possibility for this personal in-person encounters with people of your team. This can be one-on-one with your manager. This can be anything, but it's about the in-person connections with your team. And if you work in an agile team, or you have a specific role where you also have those cross-team interactions, you want to have this sort of meetings as well. Thirdly, those spontaneous encounters. So you don't want to have a situation, maybe you've recognized this previously, that you go to the office, only the regular people are over there, so the people you see always in the office, versus you're having your team calls with your team members while you're in the office. So you want to make sure that if you're in the office, that there are also other people, and not only the people from your team or cross team you want to work with together, but also to have some spontaneous encounters, not always the same people. And lastly, you want to make sure that your facilities, that you have a perfect utilization. So this is actually the context where we are playing in. And so on the left side, if you talk about working from home, working from the office, which is very much your personal, individual preferences. On team level and cross-team level, you have your agreements. And from a more real estate perspective, a facility management perspective, you want to make sure that you have your utilization. And from an HR, a leadership perspective, you want to have a spontaneous encounter for cultures. So what sort of solutions do we see, how people deal with this? So first of all, very simple. This equation can be solved just by going to the office. Actually, like the old days, right? And this is what we see happening very often when we are engaging with clients and helping them to move forward towards a hybrid way of working. They find out it's pretty complicated, it's getting too complicated, and the solution is very, very simple: Tuesday and Thursday. So we all go to the office on a few specific days, and then we have all those meetings. Is this practical? Actually not. So that means from an equation perspective, yes, you can have the spontaneous encounters. Yes, you can have the meetings in person with your team, cross team, etc. But it's not always fitting into your personal preferences of working from home, working from the office, which is actually not good for a well-being perspective. And on the other side, is also not very effective if you talk about your physical environment. Sometimes you have clients who say, okay, maybe we should try something else. And let's use this. We are going to use sensors. So that means that in every room we have sensors. And based on those sensors, actually, you know a lot. You know a lot about when people are using specific setups, how intensive they are using it, etc., etc. Beautiful data, really beautiful data. You can combine this sort of data also with other data sets. You can run beautiful analysis. But the thing is that it is fundamentally from a real estate perspective. And what's the issue is that it's very difficult to steer employee behavior from only this data. So beautiful data, it gives a lot, this has a lot of value, but it's very complex to use this data and really to achieving all the points in the equation I showed before. We also have another option. Let's reserve it. So I think you are familiar with those all these sort of applications where you can make a reservation of a specific room or other facilities. It's very nice, but also over here you have the same issue. You have beautiful data up front of who is going to use your facility. You can do a lot with it. But again, also over here, it's very difficult to use this sort of data to steer different sort of collaboration forms. then we had this discussion and we thought, how can we move forward? So we really took a few steps back and we thought, okay, we are actually the founders of activity-based working. It goes back a long time. And what's the fundamental principle if you talk about activity-based working? You talk about the fact that people can make conscious choices about when, where, and when do they want to perform the task. Based on activities they do, they can make a decision. And actually what we are trying to achieve is to create not only this great place to work by finding the win-win-win. So that an employee is happy, that he or she is really supported in the things she is doing, that the team is really supported in what they are going to achieve together, but also that the facility is being used in the most optimal way, etc., etc. If you zoom out, the whole principle of activity-based working, if you look to it, it's also applicable in the variants of hybrid ways of working. It's also making a decision in space and time about where you want to do your work is best. So what we did is we used actually the fundamental principles of activity-based working and we applied them to actually a bigger context, the context of different locations, working from home. We added to it and we started this conversation. We started this conversation about actually, what do you want to do? We all know it's a very simple question, but answering this question, and we know this already for more than 30 years, is actually not always that simple to answer it. So it's all about understanding what are the activities you are doing, what sort of collaboration pattern is under it, etc., etc., etc. So we really started to investigate and understand this very simple question: what is your personal preferences? From there on, we went to another level where we really wanted to understand what is the social interaction and collaboration structure within your organization. You can find this data on many different ways. You can think about just asking the questions. So from a survey perspective, you can build up a simple social network. You can also use other data sets, for instance, like Viva Insights, where you use collaborative metadata, where you can understand collaborational patterns, especially if this sort of data sets, if you can make a combination with other data sets, which can be project information, for instance. You have a very nice underlying structure you can use to understand collaborative structures within teams and between teams. Thirdly, you need to know for what are the limits. And then you talk about the limits of your facility. This can be in square meters, this can be in meeting rooms, it can be everything. And fourthly, you need to discuss with the leadership and understand the amount needed of those spontaneous encounters. And then you come back to this formula again. You remember what I said? It was pretty complicated. We were able to calculate it by hand, but we already realized this is beautiful, but one thing for sure, it is not very efficient. So while working on this, we came up with a question, and how can we find another way? And then we came up with February 10. And I don't know, or with somebody over here in the group, February 10, 1996, does ring a bell? Because this was the day when Deep Blue won the chess competition of Garry Kasparov. And if you look to this, this was very special moment in time, I think. And if you talk about chess by itself is not very complex, but it is about all the different combinations you can make. And this is especially where, in this case, Deep Blue took a position and being able to very fast look through all the different combinations. And that's just this simple idea we took to activity-based working, and we move forward to an activity-based working with AI, artificial intelligence inside. So we work together with specialists in the field, AI specialists in the field, having this discussion based on these variables. What can you do if you use AI? And the outcome was brilliant. It was a very perfect planning based on all the variables of employees' personal wishes, of space available, of all the different personal interactions within teams or cross teams, all those variables. What's the best option? And the outcome was always perfect. Okay, this is theory. I can imagine you think, beautiful theory. Yes, it indeed, beautiful theory. On theory, it worked. So what we did is we engaged with real clients. And we said, hey, we have this AI engine, a sort of activity-based working with AI inside. What can we do? And we had a few cases. So we had one case which was during COVID, not that big, just a little bit more than 650 people, around about 168 projects on 12 floors. What we did is exactly the procedure I just described. So we got all the information, we understood all the different sort of projects, and we did the calculation by hand. So it means that because we already got some practice in it, we were able to make this planning by hand. We also did the same after COVID on a bigger size. So that means a little bit more than 7,000 employees, but a little less than 1,500 projects on 103 floors. We also were able to make those calculations by hand. And then we used the AI engine. So again, what we wanted to achieve, very simple. On the left side, we really wanted to appreciate all the individual wishes. Working from home, working from the office. So we really want to appreciate the personal preferences. One remark in this case, what was really appreciated by the employees when we were making these calculations was the fact that, especially in this case, it were line managers. For line managers, it was very difficult to make this planning by hand because they had so many encounters with the different teams that they ended up at being in the office almost every day. So for them, it was very, very valuable to see, or there was an option to also appreciate their preferences of working from home, working from the office. Secondly, those in-team, cross-team collaborations. So what's the social underlying infrastructure of it? The amount of spontaneous encounters, and of course, the utilization of the facilities. So when we did the same calculations with the AI engine, so in this case, based on the individual preferences between 2 or 3 and sometimes even 4 days in the office, we are able to improve the team and cross-team collaboration with 60%. So what this means is that by hand, we were able to plan in the amount of days people were available, some in-person meetings within the teams, across teams. But when we used AI to find the perfect pattern, we found a pattern which was much more efficient. So that means that there was a 60% increase of collaboration time. The same happened for the opposite. So the other time available, the spontaneous encounters. We were able to manage by hand that people could have some spontaneous encounters, but when we're using this engine, we were able to increase this with 40% more. And lastly, but not least, if you look to the facilities, in this case, we were able to reduce 20% of the space. So that means that we were able to plan it on such a manner that we could use space much more efficient. So wrapping it up, the point I wanted to make is hybrid ways of working. I think we all agree upon the fact that it will have a position in time. Everybody has this experience of working from home, pros, cons, but it seems to be a tendency that we will do something with it moving forward. In our practice, what we've seen is that so many clients who are willing to make it operational, that they come to a point where they are getting stuck in planning. And indeed, this is very complex. There are so many variables and so many different sort of interests brought to the table that's almost impossible to solve. So that means that is one of the biggest reasons why maybe hybrid way of working will fail at the end. But we found a solution, and with this solution, we can really very simple run different scenarios and really socialize the data and make a difference. Because I think moving forward, we really need to sort of flip the coin. Instead of using data and then making a great design, I think we should gather the data, which can be very roughly. It doesn't need to be precise. It can also sometimes be just a hypothesis. And then based on this data, we can run a scenario. And taking this scenario to the users and really start to discuss with them from, hey, do you recognize this? So that means that based on the decisions and the choices you made as an individual or as a team, given these constraints, it will mean probably this sort of scheme to follow. And this interaction is really becoming very important and really you create a sort of platform for change actually. And based on those interactions, you come to a point where you just say, okay, let's move forward. We take this way forward as a plan where you come up with great design. That's my story for you. And really feel free to connect me on LinkedIn or send me a message. And if you have a case where you really want to play with it, just reach out to me, and looking forward to help you with it.
Thank you very much, Marco. Fascinating again. It's just I've got even more questions than I had this morning. But if the guests online have got some questions coming in, but I've got a question for you. Do leaders trust AI? Is there still a challenge? We talk about trusting each other, but is artificial intelligence trusted yet by leaders of businesses?
That's a good question. If you talk about AI, to be honest, it's even older than talking about hybrid ways of working. Back then, when I was studying philosophy, one of the studies we did was about AI, artificial intelligence, already very old. So there is, the first point I want to make, there is a lot of knowledge, really deep knowledge about artificial intelligence. The thing is why in this process actually AI really gets a position is twofoldly. First of all, we make this planning and calculations actually by hand. So you can see them and all the decisions made, and you can compare them with something the computer did. So that means on this point, you can really see that the computer makes these calculations and actually make all the comparisons much more faster. Thirdly, everybody has a stake in the table, Mark. So that means that you as an employee, you give your input. You as a team, with the decisions you want to make, you have a position at the table. So everybody has a position on the table and for this discussion. And it's just the outcome where we can walk around. So this is not a hocus pocus. This is just a smart way of using computer power.
Yeah, and I kind of agree that often you start off checking it and then you don't need to check it anymore. It's a bit like when I first started using Excel spreadsheets. I still check the Excel calculations just to make sure that Bill Gates had got it right. And so it's really interesting. I love the thing about the challenges of the weak ties and the strong ties, that some of those weak ties have got weaker. And did you measure any of that? Was it particularly team? I did hear you mention team to team. So it wasn't just within the team, it was team collaboration, one team to another as well.
In this case, where we looked at, so if you have an organization and you look to an organization from a social network perspective, what you see is that employees engage with many people in the organization. Some of them are from the team itself, and some are from outside the teams. That can be from another department where they have some spontaneous engagements with or whatever. It can be everything. What we know from practice is that maintaining this sort of relations is good for productivity in a way of operational costs, because if you know people in your organization, you can deal much more easily with specific cases. We also know that it is good for innovation and socialization, etc., etc. We also know from practice that a fast-growing internal social network is very good for onboarding and for staying within an organization. So therefore, we are always very interested in having a clue about what's going on in the social networks. And what we saw in the pandemic, which was actually a very, how do you call it, beautiful social experiment. Sorry, for a researcher perspective, it's a beautiful social experiment. We could see the difference. We could really see the difference between a pre-pandemic social network and how it changed over time due to the pandemic. And if you look to the calendars and how they were built up, we have seen so many cases where we work with Viva Insights data, where we really could see how the structure of calendars changed over time. It was really amazing to see.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to field some questions for you. There's two questions about decreasing the space by 20%. Can you say about what that looks like? And is it reduction on work seats or is it reduction on space, I guess is the kind of, and did they physically reduce their space, or was it just that the data showed them that next time they move, they need 20% less space?
Yeah, nice question. Thanks for bringing this up. If you talk about space, we can talk about space about different aspects. We can use the software to talk about seats, so where people really just sit to do the work, so ergonomical seats. We can also use other properties. And what we see, what is happening now is what has changed is the fact that after the pandemic, actually no, during the pandemic, HR has a very big stake in the table on moving forward and shaping the policy of hybrid ways of working. Secondly, is that from there on, you see a discussion to the physical environment, which is actually following because of contracts, etc., etc. So moving forward, we have this discussion about what are we going to do? Are we going to reduce space, or are we going to use space in a totally different way, maybe more decentralized? So you get a totally new space discussion than we had previously. And sometimes it can be the case that in this new settings of working is that you can indeed reduce physical square meters. So we had one case where we were working for a very large, where we were shaping the HQ of a very large organization. And this was already started this project pre-pandemic. Then the pandemic came, and based on Viva Insights, we really could see that there was a totally different behavioral pattern. So we could advise moving forward that the size we were going to build and going to deliver 2-3 years after the pandemic was actually too big, because people are going to use the space in a totally different manner. So in this case, the organization really needed to reconsider how they would go forward and how they were going to use the space. So in this case, it was really square meters.
Thank you. And again, something I said this morning, the answer is always a number, and leaders always like to listen to numbers, don't they? Talking about numbers, time. How long does the process take to feed the information into the AI engine?
This can be done very quick. What we see happen very often is that we work scenario based. So if you can really work with scenarios without having the correct numbers. And so if you know how many people we're talking about, if you have a sort of sense of what their behavioral patterns are of working from home, working from the office, how many square meters we have, you can already play with it. And it really is already very powerful. So what we see in this process of running different scenarios, where we start to explain what we are doing, what the power, actually you see the power of the insights, and then you move further. And what we see happening is then also the quality of the data is increasing. And then, of course, very technically at the end, you can make connections with all different sort of systems. But in the beginning, just with a few months, you really have a very nice insights and very strong and powerful scenarios.
Great, thank you. And Matthew Margetts says, regarding personal preferences, same question I asked you this morning, do people always know what they want? And is it always good for them?
Yeah, shall I give another answer than I did this morning? This is a very good question. Because if you actually zoom out, we have this experience already for more than 30 years. Because in activity-based working, the first question we ask is, what are you doing and why? And although it sounds as a very simple question, it is very difficult for people to answer. And what we see now during the pandemic, or thanks to the pandemic, the way of working really has been disrupted, and all questions are being asked that never been asked before. So what we do, and I think that's part of our job, is really to guide this sort of question and discuss with clients to really make it tangible for them what they are doing and why they are doing the things they do and what is helpful for them. So to give you an example, and I think that's very much powerful if you use data, you can move away from the point where things are opinions, because we all have a sort of feeling about things. If you come with the numbers, like you said, Mark, it's always in the numbers. If you come with figures, and in those figures, you really can show a client, okay, this is actually what is happening now. Based on those figures, you can have a discussion. You can have an opinion about the numbers. These are facts. And that's always very powerful to make it very tangible for you. The question is, for instance, having a lot of meetings. If you ask somebody, what are you doing? Okay, I have a lot of meetings. The question is this good for you? Yes or no? So when we measure on meta level, the amount of data of meetings and how it grew over time in the pandemic, and we compared it with, for instance, other data sets of absenteeism, etc., there's a very clear answer, I can tell you that. And that's really the data combined, which is very powerful if you're on board level having this sort of conversations. Sorry, Mark, a long answer again, but a very good question.
Great, well, thank you. And Tracy, yes, there will be a recording on our YouTube channel, and I'll make sure you get that link before you go. And Matthew, you social capital is always going to be a problem, I think, whatever. It doesn't mean it's something that can't be solved. But someone did ask the question, and I go on.
Yeah, sorry, one point, talking about this sort of data sets. One of the things we think is going to be very fascinating is having this sort of data, of working with this sort of systems. It gives you a sort of sense of a behavior pattern. What we see happen very often when we work with data and our clients is that we get the data, we use the data to answer a question, we create a dashboard, and then we come back every 3 months to discuss how the data is changing over time. If you combine this sort of data with, for instance, censoring data, you can come to a point where you also can make predictions for the future. So also based on about behavioral patterns, you can really say very valuable things about future behavioral patterns. So that is maybe an idea to dive into if you talk about this sort of applications and in a post situation.
Thank you. And post-occupancy data, have you done any post-occupancy measurement after doing this?
And what is this? You mean using this sort of software?
Yeah, and then measuring after you've made changes and then doing post-occupancy evaluation.
Yeah, and that really works well.
Great, thank you. Someone did mention, and Rosie, great point, could this be used for the community in any way, like urban planning? And Paul raised the issue that there is something called space syntax, which we recognize. But I feel the difference between space syntax and this is that space syntax is often about observation. But what this part of AI does, it gets individual input as well. It asks the users as well, rather than just observing the users. Am I right in that?
I don't know space context, so I can't answer this question. What I can touch upon is the idea of space planning. One of the cases we are working on is trying to imagine a very, very complex building. And with a complex building, I mean there are many, many functions in this building. And there is a continuously an improvement of the specific facilities. So imagine there is a room, and after a few years it needs to be improved, or some functions will grow, other will decline. So it's very complex also from a planning perspective. What's very powerful with this sort of software is because you can actually look at it as a sort of city. And what's very powerful in here is that you can run all those scenarios. So that means that you also can make different sort of plannings. What if a specific facility is not available, or half the time available, or is twice as double much available? So you can play with this sort of variables to see what it means for the people and how they the spontaneous encounters, or they're able to work over there, etc., etc. So you can also use it a little bit the other way around. And that's the strength. That's the nice thing of software. But still, I think it's very important to make sure that if you play with it, that's cool. But moving forward, before you do anything tangible, You really need to socialize the data with the users. That's I think very powerful.
As you should with any if you're taking information from people, you need to feed it back to them as well. So that's yeah. So thank you. Paul asks, is there a URL for the AI software anywhere? I'm guessing not, which is why I put Marco's email address in. So if you want to contact Marco directly, I'm sure he'll happily chat to you further and even give you a demo of it. I'm sure he would do that as well. And I can't see any other questions. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to add at all.
No, I think that's great. Thanks.
Marco, thank you very much for another great session. Really enjoyed this. And just to let everyone know, there will be a follow-up email with some links that Marco's putting together. Also, that it will be available on our YouTube channel. So do have a look at that, and I'll make sure you get that. Also, as you go, you will be taken to a website, which is our feedback. So you can let us know how incredibly well Marco did. Thank you everyone for joining us, but especially Marco, thank you for your time today and your great insights. I'm sure there are people going to be in touch with you to find out more about the AI software. And your applause comes in the chat box now. So thank you very much.
Thank you.